When the conservative New Calendarists take this same step, they will be following the path of the Holy Fathers. They will have separated themselves from the heretics and joined themselves to the assembly of the Orthodox. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Maximus, for your talk, for your paper. The next part of the conference is the open forum, where people can ask any questions they have, voice their opinions. Okay, let's start from right to left. Okay.
You refer to, when you say Catholic in your speech, you mentioned the word Catholic a lot. What exactly is the again with you?
Catholic is something that means universal, and it doesn't mean universal in all senses of universal. It doesn't necessarily mean universal geographically, in the Roman Catholic sense of the universal church operating across the whole world. But Catholic means something that's whole, it's well-rounded. You cannot subtract anything from it, nor can you add anything to it. That's what Catholic means, togathon, right, the wholeness. So another way of saying the Catholicity of the church is talking about the wholeness of the church, the perfection of the church, the universal applicability of its doctrines. Good. Okay. Yes.
Leonida, today we heard 3 scholarly papers on ecumenism, and I congratulate the panel for presenting them to us. I'd like to ask, now that we know the dangers, the evils of ecumenism, I'd like the panel to maybe discuss what steps can the Christian, the Orthodox Christian, take to not to fall aside to the wayside of ecumenism? What should be done? What should we, as listeners and hearers of your treatises, do in order to not to fall victims of ecumenism, if ecumenism is so as you put it, it's injurious to the Orthodox Church.
I guess we start on the Father Maximus. Do you want to give an answer to that?
The question is, what should the average person do in their response against ecumenism? How can they help in the struggle against ecumenism? And the first thing they can do is, and I'll repeat myself what I stated in my speech, is sever themselves from communion with any bishop who preaches ecumenism. This will have 2 effects. One, it will help their own personal spirituality, because this way they'll be separating themselves from a church which is falling away from the Catholicity of the church, which is falling away from the true Orthodox Church. And if they want to attain salvation, they must belong to that church which confesses the true Orthodox doctrines. The second effect that will have is it will send a very clear message to the heretical hierarchs that the faithful do not tolerate what they are doing. That it's that what they are doing is unacceptable to the body of Orthodox believers, and that if they continue to do so, they will end up with a church with no people in it. So, and furthermore, when a person breaks communion with the heretical hierarch, that sends a message to other people as well, so that it creates a sort of domino effect, and that ultimately leads to the restoration of orthodoxy in its fullness. And if you look at historically the way the church has dealt with different heresies that have risen in the course of its existence, various heresies have arisen, and the Orthodox faithful have severed themselves from communion with these heretical bishops, and gradually the accumulating impetus of of those faithful had the effect of restoring the fullness of orthodoxy even to those bodies which were confessing a heresy. Now sometimes that resulted in the return of the heretical body back to the Orthodox Church. For example, the Arians, there are no more Arians today. There's no Arian church. Sometimes, same thing with the iconoclasts, there is no iconoclast church per se today. Sometimes that resulted in the heretical group being definitively cut off from the Orthodox Church, such as, for example, the Monophysites. Inevitably, those groups which were cut off ended up being marginalized. So the first very important step is for each person to separate themselves in communion. And it's also very important simply to look to one's own personal spirituality. If one confesses orthodoxy in its dogmatic purity, one is inevitably led to the practice of orthodox spirituality, because the orthodox spirituality is simply the expression of orthodox dogma in one's life. And when God sees the Orthodox Christians practicing the Christian life, He blesses the Orthodox Christians. And this will again lead to the restoration of orthodoxy in its fullness. Thank you.
As I said in my speech, what has led to this problem has been too many of us and too many of the New Calendar churches have abdicated responsibility to do what the church has historically done, to stand up to heresy, to even know what heresy is. We want to live comfortable lives. We don't want to have to do the difficult thing, and this is human nature. We don't want to go out and stand up for the faith. We want to have others be our caretakers and others take care of things and teach us and give us our truth. We don't want to have to take responsibility, individual responsibility for those things. And this is what happens historically in the church when the faithful, and I use that word very loosely, decide that they're not going to be faithful anymore. They end up getting leaders, as the Hebrews got leaders that lead them down a path. Now God allows this to happen, and He allowed this to happen in the church numerous times because people had become lax and they lacked the fervor. They became the lukewarm, like the church of Philadelphia, which Jesus said He spews out of the mouth. The reason that ecumenical leaders have been allowed to take control of almost all the Orthodox churches is because the Orthodox themselves have abdicated their responsibility, have ceased to be pious people. It's like a judgment that God's placed upon all of us. And the question we have to ask is those that are in the so-called ecumenical churches, are they willing to give up the responsibility that they've turned over to their leaders and take it back for themselves? And each of us in our lives constantly has to ask that question: are we going to take responsibility for our own salvation? Are we going to turn it over to so-called clergy and bishops and leaders and let them tell us what we need to do to be saved? And I think that, as I said, the central problem that has been in the ecumenical movement is that there are too many people that are willing to sit back and say, let's let the bishops do whatever they want, because they operate under the false belief that as long as the bishop wears a vestment and chants certain prayers that they've chanted all along, that's going to prevent that bishop from becoming a heretic. Anyone that knows church history knows, as I said in my speech, as I said about the anathemas that are read on the Sunday of Orthodoxy, that it was the bishops that led the flock. It's the shepherds which lead the flock over the edge into the cliff. And we have to be faithful enough to shout to those sheep that are being led over the flock. You're led over the cliff by their unfaithful shepherds. We have to be willing to tell them, look, this is what you have to do. You have to stand up to these people. You have to say, no, we're not going to put up with that anymore.
Cool.
There's a question right here. Any questions? All right.
Yes.
Okay.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
First, who are the main leaders trying to establish the Ecumenism? That means, second, is the Church of Greece, the new calendar, are the founders or are going to be founders?
Church of Greece.
Would you please repeat the questions, because back here we cannot listen to properly?
Please repeat the question.
Which, repeat the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this what repeat the question refers to?
Use your mic to read the question.
Why don't you repeat the questions through the
Yes,
microphone? right?
yes, I'll do
Yeah.
that. So the question is, who are the leaders of Ecumenism? Part A. And part B is the Church of Greece a follower of these leaders? I'll answer the second one first. And I'll refer to recent events, November 2006. The Pope of Rome visited Constantinople. He participated in the liturgy in a way that Pope of Rome hadn't participated before, citing the creed, or reading the creed, sitting on a synthronon. He wasn't sitting on the Patriarch's throne, but he was sitting on a synthronon in the Church of St. George. All the stasidia, all the stalls along the edge are for the bishops. And then the Archbishop of Athens, Christodoulos, went to Rome and visited the Pope. And so the question is, so what was the Archbishop of Christodoulos trying to do? And he went to the Pope not as the the Patriarch of Constantinople is the representative, is the Patriarch of a see that was established by St. Andrew. But Archbishop Christodoulos went to Rome as the bishop of a Pauline church. There's competition among the Orthodox leaders as to who can outdo whom. Right? And so is there a leader? I would say it's diffuse. Diffuse meaning in the sense that it's spread out. And there are a lot of people, it's an ideological network, a lot of people who agree with this and agree with each other, some of whom are in competition with each other and try to outdo each other, like Christodoulos, Archbishop Christodoulos and Patriarch Bartholomew. They've been in conflicts before between themselves. You could also add into the equation the Patriarchate of Moscow, in conflict with Constantinople, and at some points having pro-ecumenist stands, other times being a little skeptical of ecumenism and shifting back and forth. And so that would be my answer. I don't know if one of the fathers wants to give another answer to that question. Is that question?
This is a very complicated question because we don't know who among the leaders of the church are in fact working for other groups of people. We can never be completely sure that enemies of the church that seek to destroy the church are not using these people. We don't know. But we do know that the church has been infiltrated in the past by people. The iconoclastic movement itself, there are many who argue that there were Islamic and Judaic elements in that movement that sought to destroy the church from within, using the leaders of the church to do so. But whether or not the leaders, these bishops are Freemasons or occultists or whatever they may be, it doesn't, ultimately, this fact is not as important as recognizing what they're doing with the church. What their motivation is and who they really are is not as important as standing up and fighting what they're doing. Because if we stand for the truth and if we isolate them, I mean that the movement against iconoclasts and the movement against all of the early church heresies began first with the average parish priest and the average Orthodox going to church who refused to go along. It's like all of the leaders, as we know in the Council of Florence, except Mark of Ephesus, all of the bishops signed the agreements for reunion with Rome. And they went back and the bishops began to implement in their churches the agreement which they had signed, but the people in the churches refused to go along with it. The problem we face today is that most of the people in the churches are ignorant of, they have not been catechized, they don't understand what the faith is, and they can't recognize what a heresy is. And it's our responsibility to educate them, to speak the truth to them. As Jesus said, to speak the truth with love to them. Not to be accusatory necessarily. Because they're like sheep, and sheep are not very smart animals, and you've got to corral them, you've got to have patience with them. Because just as I said, just because someone puts a vestment on, just because someone goes and does a liturgy, just because a bishop wears a mitre doesn't make him Orthodox. Just because a leader gets up and says the right words doesn't mean he's a hypocrite. He isn't a hypocrite. And the thing we have to do, as I ended my speech, we have to learn to test the spirits. Test the spirits. This is something that Christ tells us all of the time, because the ministers of the devil masquerade themselves as ministers of light. And if we pray and we fast and we nurture our own spiritual life, we'll be able to have the eyes to see. We'll have to be able to have the eyes to see where heresy is. And then, as evangelists, to live and be willing to be persecuted and to die, to not let others do the fighting for us if necessary. You know, in the iconoclastic period, many people died defending icons before finally iconoclasm was destroyed. It was the blood of all of those people, unknown people, for all of those, for that 200 years that the church was consumed by this. It was their blood, their sacrifice, that made it possible finally for that heresy to be defeated. And we may be in for the long haul. This may be a process that's going to take another couple hundred years. I don't know. But we have to at least be willing to get into the fight and do what is necessary to be able to and as I said, we need to give up our lives if necessary.
Question.
Are you suggesting that the only way to try to address divisions between churches is not to trust them and have people exit their churches? There's no visible manner in which to try to address the issue. Okay.
You mean the division between Orthodox and non-Orthodox?
No. Between the old and new calendar.
Between the old and new calendar.
Repetition?
Yeah, so if I understand your question, what you're saying is separation the only way? Well, why don't you repeat the question?
I'm trying to understand it. Someone asked, well, what can the average person do? And he said, well, don't support your bishop, walk out, go somewhere where you can. So I'm asking, is the only legitimate or visible way
Yes.
to try to foster this dialogue, which I was reading about, to have certain people to walk away? There's no other way to try to...
Yeah, so the question is separation the only way of addressing the issue? I mean, before you get really deep into the question, at the face of it, at the beginning of it, there's basically two things you can do. You can separate immediately, or you can try to reason within your community. And historically, at least in the last century, what's happened is the people who have tried reasoning on ecumenism have not been paid attention to. They've been marginalized. Often there are social prejudices that have been involved, elitist attitudes on the part of people in leadership who haven't listened. In recent history, in the last 2 or 3 years, in 2004, there was a conference at Thessaloniki of Orthodox scholars. These aren't small names. These were Hierotheos Vlachos and professors, Father George Metalinos, and Father Theodoros Zisis, and a number of university professors at the University of Athens and Thessaloniki and around Greece, and with graduate students. There was hundreds of people that attended these conferences, and in Athens in 2005, and Thessaloniki in 2005. And they came up with conclusions, they came up with positions, they all had very orthodox stands. And it's very laudable what they did. but did anyone pay attention to them? Were their concerns addressed? Did any patriarch recognize that conference and say there was a conference and it brought up some points, that there's a division in the flock that needs to be mended, that there isn't a consensus in the church about what we're doing? So recent history, but in the history of the last century, the 20th century, shows that the second option, although theoretically possible and possibly possible, hasn't worked yet. No one's found a way to make it work. That's not to say that from within the church of Constantinople, the church of Greece, can be transformed, but that's never impossible, because everyone can transform themselves. But what's happened in the last 100 years, in the last century, is that the dialogue has been stifled by leaders who want to have an agenda. And it made it very difficult. Another part of the question, a lot of these questions, is, or even addressing your question, walking out on the bishop. I mean, the basic ministry of the bishop is the ministry of the unity of the church. And the ministry of the unity of the church includes upholding dogmas, because the dogmas are what express the original message of the church and the message of the apostles, the Evangelia, the gospel of the apostles. What happens when a bishop steps aside, steps apart from the Catholic witness of the church? Catholic witness of the church meaning the people, let's say, horizontally present today, but also vertically in terms of history, right? The fathers in the past. What happens when a bishop steps aside from that? Is he the minister of ecclesial unity? Can he rightly be the mouthpiece of the church? Can he embody even institutionally the church? That's a question. And the old calendar church, the people who separated themselves from the bishops of the Ecumenical Patriarchate or the Church of Greece, have said that they forfeited their right, these bishops have forfeited their right to represent the church because they have let go of their ministry. They have denied their ministry of unity. That's a problem. That's something that can't be denied. Now, you can agree or disagree with what the old calendar state was right or wrong. Everyone's free to disagree. But the problem is nevertheless there, right? There are hierarchs that have stepped aside from the Catholic witness of the church. And fundamentally, it becomes a moral problem. And the last part of the subtitle of the conference is Theological, Ecclesiological, and Moral Problems. Right? To what extent do you allow, to what extent can you agree, to what extent can you allow your bishop to step aside from the Catholic witness of the church? How can you tolerate that? And then, in communing with the bishop who stepped aside from the Catholic witness of the church, are you witnessing to his confession? Are you saying his confession is true? If you disagree with what he's doing, then in witnessing his confession, that's an untruthful act, right? So that's a problem. That's a moral issue that's into this. So the whole issue of ecumenism is multifaceted, and it's very complex, and it's not an easy question to solve. This is why it's the biggest challenge that the church has faced. At least I would say since 1453, with the destruction of the Byzantine Empire and the subjugation of the Church of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire, and then the churches of Antioch and Jerusalem and Egypt and Alexandria to the Ottoman Empire. Ecumenism is the biggest challenge. Because under the Ottomans, the Sultan Mehmed granted the Patriarchate the ethnarchy. And the Patriarch was able to keep the nation together and keep Orthodox Christians together and upheld the unity, his central ministry, his central diaconia, upheld the unity of the church. But under ecumenism, the challenge of ecumenism strikes at the very heart of that unity. Right? And the evidence of that is that it strikes at the bishops. It's usually bishops who are really strong advocates. There are priests and lay people, but the bishops are the buck stops at the bishop. Right? Any other fathers want to answer?
we've been speaking a lot about the unity of the church and how the church is one, and how there's one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And I think most of us accept that as a truism, that there is one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And we've been applying this to a certain extent to the opposition of between the Orthodox Church and the heterodox churches, the Roman Catholic Church, the Monophysite churches, the Protestant churches. But it can be, that same principle can be and should be applied to the division between the old calendars and the new calendars. The fact is that what we see today as the Orthodox Church has been divided into two sections, the old calendars and the new calendars church. And if we accept and we believe in that principle of the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, we inevitably have to ask ourselves, which of these two churches, the old calendars church and the new calendar church, is the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Either one of those two churches is either heretical and schismatic, or the other one is. They can't both be the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. So what each individual person has to do is look at the facts and decide for themselves which of these two churches is the church. Because they can't both be the one church. The two churches are in diametrically opposed to each other. They condemn each other. So it's imperative for each person to examine and decide which of the two churches. And I think if any person looks honestly at the two churches and compares their qualities and their beliefs, they'll find that the old Calendar Church accepts simply what the Orthodox Church has believed throughout its historical existence, whereas what the New Calendar Church believes, both on an official level and the beliefs that are rampant throughout the Church, throughout the hierarchy and throughout the theological bodies, is something very different from what Orthodoxy has traditionally believed.
I just have one quick thing to say about that the decision may be made for those that are trying to live in the new calendar world and still be conservative over time anyway, because I think that these leaders have a nefarious plan and they intend to take the new calendar church all the way into complete and total apostasy. So the choice is going to be, I chose to leave the new calendar church, 16 years ago. There are others that, they're hanging on, thinking, well, somehow this is going to turn around. But my own gut hunch that the leaders of the New Calendar movement intend to take them into complete apostasy. So you're going to be faced with the same choice inevitably, that if you're going to either have to embrace total heresy, total apostasy, you're going to have to leave. And that's my prediction as to what is going to happen, because I don't think these leaders intend anything approaching orthodoxy. They're going to be praying with Wiccans, they're going to be praying with pagans, they're going to do whatever is necessary to destroy the church, to empty the church so that no one is going there anymore. I mean, if you just look at the progression over time. So all of those that think that they can make an accommodation in the New Calendar Church and watch like a frog that's in a pot of boiling water and the heat is gradually turned up, there's going to come a point at which it's going to be so lethal to remain within the New Calendar Church, because the outrageous behavior of the leaders is going to be so unbearable for anyone with any piety that they're going to have no choice but to leave. I don't know when that point is going to be or how long it's going to take. But for me, it was 16 years ago. I mean, for many others, because they believe, as I said, in this false belief that these leaders are somehow going to be protected from making that walk towards heresy. That they're willing to stick around for the show. But I think ultimately we have to have the courage and to encourage these people to have their eyes open and say, how far do these leaders have to go? How crazy do they have to become before you finally open your eyes and say, we have to make a statement. We have to stand up against it. And I said, because of the overall lack of piety in a lot of New Calendar churches, people are there just to, for baklava and the social reasons that they're there. Many of these people would follow them all the way along the way. But for those that genuinely desire to live a pious life within these so-called New Calendar churches, my prediction is it's going to get progressively more difficult for you to stay within those communities, given the further movement these leaders intend to take the church towards, ever greater heresy.
You mentioned before, I have a question next. It's like you mentioned before that unknown forces are behind the movement here. Unknown forces are taking us like enemies, separating us, guiding us. And obviously this was going on. And we do not know who these forces are.
Well, this is the funny thing. I mean, as I said, I could get up here as a distraction. Because ultimately it is a distraction, because whoever these people are, and whatever their motives are, it's, as I said there, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. These are demonic forces that are using these people.
Are these forces that control the economic, political?
Well, one could argue, that all of these forces, and ultimately it's demonic, are responsible for economic reasons and everything. And I said, I think the mistake that many old calendarists make is they want to focus on Freemasons or Zionists or all of these groups, and get involved in the minutiae of who the various agents are that the demonic realm are using, and lose sight of the big picture.
There's the big boys who want me to believe in you that I am a body and a brain and that's it?
Yeah.
Yes. Another question. Do I have a soul or I have a soul?
Do I have a soul?
Do I have a soul or I have a soul? Think before you answer this one. Because my brother was a bishop at the time. He said to me, I got the bishop before I give you the answer.
Maybe on another conference.
So it's a very Theodorian question.
Another conference.
Well, I'll defer to what.
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to, we could talk, speak on it. So, really quick question, then I gotta switch back to, really quick answer, and I'll switch back to man is a psychosomatic union. So,
Excuse me, can I say something?
well,
If we understand, this will help us to understand who have taken over our news, our heart, and they control us. And this is how the best way to fight them.
the noetic yes, the noetic dimension is indeed valid, because if what Mr. Liggins says coincides in a certain sense with what Father Michael said, in that it's a battle over our minds, it's a battle over our heart. All spiritual warfare is over our heart. Right? What I wanted to bring to the discussion was, it's not just the old calendars that are advocating excommunication and separation. We have the conclusions of the Inter-Orthodox Theological Conference in Thessaloniki, 2004. Ecumenism, Origins, Expectations, and Disenchantment. One of the proposals that they suggest is that it be made manifest to church leaders everywhere that in the event that they continue to participate in and lend support to the pan-heresy of ecumenism, both inter-Christian and inter-religious, the obligatory salvific, canonical, and patristic course for the faithful, clergy and laity, is excommunication. In other words, ceasing to commemorate bishops who are responsible for and co-communicants with heresy and delusion. This isn't old calendars writing it. This is university professors. This is not a recourse to schism, but rather a God-pleasing confession, just as the ancient fathers, the bishop confessors in our own day, have done. And there's some more. There's a reference to Metropolitan Augustinus Kardiotis, who in the 65, along with Montatos, broke communion with the Ecumenical Patriarchy. And so they have 9 proposals altogether. This is in Romiosini, which is available over there. It's free. This is a draft copy. We're still working on it.
Well, I don't you think that Nostradamus were both have left the United States?
Right. That's a good question. I'd like to ask that myself. The question is, why haven't Metalinos Vlachos, Theodoros Zisis left already? What they're doing in this document, they've all signed this document, is that they're citing as an option. Why haven't they left? I think because they still have the vision or the opinion that there could be some correction wrought from within.
Well,
The characteristic.
Leonida, let's put it this way. If they leave, then they will not be recognized. As long as they stay in, then they have to be recognized.
There's also a lot of secular, yes, good point.
And as long as they're in, they're also a manifestation of the New Calendar Church, as well as are the grace-bearing elders that still remain in it,
Yes.
Elder Ephraim, and the ones that have recently left us. So we cannot forget that these are our leaders, have been our leaders
Right.
historically. Theosis, people that have gained theosis, right? And we have to follow them out. If we all go, we follow them out.
But at the same time, I would say, no, you have a valid point. I would say that you have to also be aware that it's becoming increasingly problematic. It's becoming increasingly untenable. And Matalinos and Zisis and Hierothos Vlachos all admit it privately.
Absolutely.
And indirectly. Like Hierothos Vlachos in Parevas indirectly
Yeah.
writes about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's increasingly becoming problematic. Now, I mean, why? There's also, in general, there's also some secular issues that come into play in a lot of people. I'm not saying specifically for Metalinos or Zisis or Hierothos Vlachos, but secular issues in what will happen to Greece if this happens. What will happen to the nation state? What will happen to the state church? What will happen if, for example, if everyone reverts back to the old calendar and the state celebrates the 25th of March on the 25th of March with a civil calendar, and the church celebrates the 25th of March on April 7th? To me, those aren't valid questions, because that is the manifestation of a specific historic ideology, and the ideology of the nation state. Now, Hellenism existed before 1821. It existed within the ethnarchy of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It existed within the empire, the Roman Empire. It existed as city-states before then. And Hellenism is not dependent on the nation state. And the nation state should not be the basis according to which we make our ecclesiastical distinctions. Beyond that, the church supersedes the nation state. Right? The ethnos kratos. It supersedes the nation state. In 1924, one of the reasons that they were brought up for changing the calendar was, well, at least maybe the current apologists in 1924 will say, well, it made easier people's lives because 2 calendars was too complicated. Well, I don't know calendars, and I'm not that confused what day it is. There's also, all right, fine. If they're confused, let's convene an ecumenical council. Let's all make the decision together. But the way things worked out and the method it was implemented, it all was anti-Catholic and uncanonical. Fine. Question.
We are discussing about why Metalinos and other people, right, haven't left. Yes. Okay. My question, personal, is what God at the end has to say about this, right? Okay. May I give a few minute personal testimonial about why I converted from the new calendar to the patristic one?
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm not ready. My English is not very good.
No, that's fine.
Even the fact that I'm a professor, my theological English is not that good.
Yeah. Okay.
I was born in Alexandria, Egypt. Never heard over there the old calendar. I went to Greece. When I worked at OTE, telecommunications company, I heard ridiculous concepts about the old calendar. Oh, he's an old calendar or something. When I came to the States as a Fulbright scholar, I remember a preacher telling us in Greece, why don't you, new calendar of course, why don't you read the Bible every day? Read the Bible, read the Bible. So I went to the University of Kansas, I was reading the Bible every day. Finally, I got the evogia to go to the school in
Holy Cross.
Holy Cross. This was back in 1964. At the end of the school year, 64, 65, I realized that I had so many things against me in the eyes of God, and I saw the situation. And I'm talking about 64, 65. It was Lent time, and nobody was having fasting. So I said, well, what's going on over here? Am I supposed to be here to become maybe a theologian or a priest or something? Or am I going to lose my soul? However, I met, through His grace, Father Panteleimon and so forth, and I realized that there is what? There is the old calendar. And this started giving me ideas. Then in 65, you mentioned about Athenagoras, right? I says, wait a minute, there's something wrong over here. At the same time, I was the main chanter, nobody knew how to chant, at St. Dionysius in Kansas City, New Calendars. Right? After what happened in 65, I said to them, look, do you want me as a chanter? I don't want to get involved because there's something wrong, okay? And they realized this, and nobody paid any attention, right? So I stayed as a chanter, and then got married with a new calendar. I wasn't too sure about what's happening. And after that, I realized that, hey, forget about it. We came with my wife and our first child over here to Chicago, actually Aurora. I was a city engineer. But I had to go back because I was under the exchange program. I'm sorry I'm taking your time.
No, that's fine.
Yes.
It's useful. It's profit.
Then we had the blessing to come to the Russian church on Kedzie.
The Russian church abroad.
The Russian church abroad. We met Kastelwagen. He became on nos to our first child over there. And I said to him, look, why don't we start our own church? He says, well, we're only 5 families. Does it matter? 5, that's it. So let's start something. We left in 92. We went to Greece because we had to, under the exchange program. I and Ari started their church back in 1972, right? Over there, you can tell, and I'm saying this for His glory, the war from my in-laws against me. Weren't you an old calendarist and you pretended and you got married with the new, oh my God, you can, right? Christmas time. We are fasting, they were having Christmas. All sorts of things. You can tell, right? I don't want to extend my saying. A war all the time. Are you gonna save the world? Okay, my in-laws. My mother-in-law is still alive. She's so active in church life. Says, look, these are the canons. If your bishop does this, you have the right, or the canons, which means the Holy Spirit gives you the right to leave and confess your faith, right? The faith. Are you going to save the world? Are you this? Are you... All sorts of ridiculous things. What can you do? I mean, you have to confess because you never know when you're going to die, right? And this is my point, and this is my story. Can I say this for His glory? Okay. My father was a chanter in Alexandria and then in Jerusalem. Okay, the Onaos Anastasios, whatever. And of course, when he came to Greece, he was done with a new calendar. He says, "What are you doing? And you with the Lord or the..." Well, it was his business, right? Which means we knew that there was an old calendar. We were raised in a different way. However, God gives you the choice to do the right thing, right? If someone has hesitations, pray, and God will give us the light. Over here, I have a degree, for His glory, in Byzantine music, okay? And because of my father had a good voice, and it seems that God gave me a good voice, and some people tell me, you know what, if you were with some new calendars, if you were with us, you could have made another salary. You teach a divine, you could have made another salary. But he says, look, would this money make me enter heaven? I don't think so. So, this is my story. Thank you.
I want to address a point that was raised by the gentleman in the corner there. He said that that while ecumenism is very problematic and is getting increasingly so, we have to follow our elders out. I would say that first of all, we old calendars did follow our elders out. There were many very holy spirit-bearing elders from Mount Athos who refused to accept the new calendarist in the innovation of the new calendar, and moreover, all of the monasteries on Mount Athos ceased commemoration of the patriarch when Patriarch Athanagorus in 1965 when he lifted the anathemas against the Roman Catholic Church. And there were many spirit-bearing elders on Mount Athos and outside of Mount Athos who refused to accept these innovations in ecumenism, and they separated communion from them. And these elders were known for being clairvoyant men, holy men of God. Then the second thing I would say is that the question of whether we should follow the elders is actually a secondary question, because in the Orthodox Church we don't dedicate ourselves to a personality. We make our decisions based on what the Church has taught throughout its history. In other words, we follow the teachings of the Church, not the teachings of an individual private person, no matter how pious a life he may seem to lead. So, although there are people in the New Calendarist Church who lead very pious lives and who are very respected monks, it's a false path to follow these people rather than what the teachings of the Church are. And I would add that it's sometimes very difficult to discern who is a spirit-bearing elder who's inspired by God and who is simply a very good person. If you look at the Roman Catholic Church, they've had many saints throughout their whole history. Some of their lives are very, very moving. If you look at the modern Monophysite Church, the Coptic Church, for example, I've read lives of Coptic saints from the modern period. In fact, their previous Patriarch Kyrillos VI, had a reputation for being a holy man, and all the Copts swear that he worked miracles. They swear that he was clairvoyant. But why did this man not convert to Orthodoxy? You can answer that in several ways. You could say maybe he was in very subtle delusion, very subtle planning. Or you can say that maybe God had something in store for him that that we don't know. But I think all of us would agree that the fact that a Monophysite saint, quote unquote, remained in the Monophysite Church was not a good thing. He ought to have become Orthodox. It would have been much better for him to become Orthodox. And I imagine he would have become much holier if he had become Orthodox than if he had stayed there. And the same thing applies to these so-called New Calendarist elders. If they, what exactly is taking place with them spiritually, I can't say. I can't judge any individual person. But the right thing for them to do is to return to the old Calendarist Church. And I think that if they do that, God will bless them many more times in the old Calendarist Church than he has in the new Calendarist Church.
I want to just quickly say there's a question right here that's next, before we move on to the next question. Is that I see, my personal view of the Old Calendar Church is that the Old Calendar Church has a protracted stand. Now, the church in general, the church's main mode of communication is exhortation. Right? We exhort everyone to live higher. And the Old Calendar Church is being protractic, as being a protractic element in the world. Yes, obviously, it's an exhortation for the spirituality of its faithful. It's evangelizing in the U.S., where we converts as well, but also towards the new calendar. It's an exhortation to action, and there's two actions available. Either you take over your church right now and turn it around right now, or leave it. I mean, those are the two options available, because it's becoming increasingly untenable, the situation, and without present action, it's going to become worse. Right? And if I'm speaking directly to the new calendars in the crowd. We invited new calendarists and old calendarists into the dialogue. And my piece in the dialogue is to say, if you don't take over your church right now, it's not going to have a happy ending. Right? Question?
I hadn't realized until today that I'm a new calendarist, and apparently am deluded in my orthodoxy. I say that with a note of sarcasm, and I mean no disrespect, but I do have an honest question, and that is, what is the church if it's not defined to some degree by the communion of bishops who have all received the faith through apostolic succession?
Right.
And I mean to say, I myself am well aware of the Ecumenism movement and have my own concerns toward it.
Right.
But I have more than a little hesitation to turn my back on those bishops that until today I've known as the Orthodox bishops in America.
Just wait up, I have a question.
John says something?
Yeah, go ahead. We can't believe this is going to sound rather strange, we don't believe in magic as Orthodox. We don't believe in shamans or priests or the Church of Wicca thing, the occult, that somehow that when someone lays hands on someone, they're endowed with magical powers, that they can't be removed from them. They're now a warlock. It's not a mechanical process by which one bishop lays his hand on another bishop and another bishop, and through a progression, like magically, they're going to be preserved and the power is going to be passed on. As from, to use the Star Wars analogy, from one Jedi Knight to another Jedi Knight. And I think the problem that many people is they want to look at apostolic succession. The Papists have apostolic succession. You can go back and look, and from the beginning they have one person laying hands on another, and on another, and on another, all throughout, since the time of the apostles. Apostolic succession without apostolic faith isn't going to produce grace. It isn't going to give you communion with God. And those that went into the church, whoever, as I said, and are now running the New Calendar Church, know that most people have a mechanical view of apostolic succession. That as long as this bishop is properly ordained, properly consecrated in this line, that they can go ever progressively towards heresy. And a lot of people will not recognize, because they have this almost magical belief in apostolic succession. If the bishops don't have apostolic faith, they're in no different position than the Roman Catholics, who, since they broke communion, since the Great Schism, have went from one innovation to another innovation to another innovation. I mean, if you look at all of the heresies that exist in Rome today, they all have their source when they separated themselves from the bishops of the Orthodox Church. So don't make the mistake of thinking that simply because the bishops are in apostolic succession, that is going to magically prevent them from going into heresy. We have the entire papal church as an example to us historically as to what can happen when you still have apostolic succession, but you've stepped away from the apostolic faith.
I mean, I just want to answer this, and there's a question in the back and a question in the middle. In pointing out that certain hierarchs in the ecumenical patriarchate are right now standing apart from the confession of the church. By no means do I understand myself as challenging your confession, because there are many dogmatically orthodox Christians in the New Calendar. From my perspective, though, I see that as a paradox, and also as an unfolding tragedy. That's my perspective on the issue, and by no means do I mean to say that you're not orthodox or that you're deluded in your understanding of orthodoxy.
How can they be dogmatic because following, by definition, hierarchs or heresy?
Well, the problem is, I would state the problem differently. I would say, if you have an orthodox mindset, if you're dogmatically orthodox, but your bishop isn't doing what you believe in, then there's a problem, right? And that doesn't say that that's to square us into the fact that you have an orthodox mindset and that the bishop doesn't. That's a problem. That needs to be addressed. That's something that people really have to think seriously about. There's a question in the back.
One of the most troubling things I've thought about ecumenism has been that the Church of Rome, the Pope of Rome, Benedict, who was once Cardinal Ratzinger, was a staunch advocate against ecumenism. It's the position of the Catholic Church to be anti-ecumenist, the Roman Catholic Church to be anti-ecumenist. So, having now become Pope, he produces, or I should say this, the Roman Catholic Church being anti-ecumenist isn't isn't going around actively believing that other churches have graces as well. They believe themselves to be the true Catholic Church. And when the Orthodox are, in their spirit of ecumenism, going from the Catholic Church, it's not the Catholics that are giving in to any Orthodox positions. It just seems, especially from what Father Marshall was telling earlier, that the Orthodox are giving, especially the Orthodox patriarch case, are giving in too much to the Roman Catholic Church in order for this church union to occur. Because it just seems to me that, the Catholics aren't moving in the direction of church union with the spirit of ecumenism. They're moving in the direction of church union so that they can, bring the Orthodox into their heresy, into their fold. How do you comprehend the actions of the patriarch case when they, the way I see it from current events, are basically selling out to the Roman Catholic Church?
That's a very good point. I have to point out that the Roman Catholic Church has a consistent ecclesiology. They're not members of the World Council of Churches, and they do have an ecumenist ecclesiology that was promulgated in, I think, a 1998 encyclical by John Paul II, the Ultimum Sin, 98, where he says, and then in Vatican II, that the Catholic Church has the fullness of the truth, and the fullness of the Catholicity. It's fully Catholic. There are manifestations of Catholicity outside of its boundaries, but they're imperfect. And for the Roman Catholics, bringing people into communion with Rome is to make those outside of the Church's boundaries full and whole. Furthermore, the Roman Catholics believe, at least the Vatican believes, that these people that are outside of the Roman Catholic Church, some of them have preserved the faith better than they have themselves. And both John Paul II and Ratzinger, Benedict, refer to the Orthodox in that. The Roman Catholics in general are very careful in the way they state their positions, and they're very careful not to give in to what they'll say about the filioque is our filioque is correct, and your theology is correct as well. They won't say, yes, the filioque is wrong. Hypostatic procession from the Son and from the Father, the Holy Spirit is wrong. They won't say that. And what happens is the Orthodox, in wanting to, I would attribute this to a cultural inferiority complex to the West, and wanting to be affirmed by the West, will say, okay, they'll give in from their position that the Spirit only proceeds from the Father, and they'll say, all right, fine, we'll accept both positions. Roman Catholics didn't retreat an inch. The Greeks, the Orthodox, not just the Greeks, but the Orthodox in general, retreated from their lines. But can you repeat your actual question?
The question was, how do we as Orthodox Christians, how should we or how do we comprehend the actions of the Patriarch going to the Patriarch of Constantinople, for instance, for one example, or I don't know about the other patriarchs, but going to Rome and then either producing these documents, like you just stated, or celebrating up to a certain point in their masses, or like the Archbishop of Greece.
Well, I have to say this. This is to answer that part of the question. That what happened in November in Constantinople and in Rome lacked the Catholic witness of the Church. The Orthodox ecumenists do not have the Catholic witness of the Church understood synchronically and diachronically. Right? Synchronically meaning today, and diachronically meaning with the past, the witness of the fathers. They lack that. Therefore, I mean, even on synodical terms, even in the terms of conciliarity, the Patriarch of Constantinople does not have the authority to effect a union between the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox. He cannot dictate it. If something like that were to happen, it would have to happen in the context of the Ecumenical Council. We actually are, it's 6 o'clock. We actually have time, I would say we have time for 2 more questions. I would like to get someone who hasn't asked a question and then break into informal discussion, so in the middle.
Okay, I have a question for Father Maximus. In the light of his comments on dialogue between monophysite churches and Orthodox churches, how does he reconcile the fact, and how should we reconcile the fact that Isaac of Syria, who was the monophysite bishop of Nineveh, was for many centuries considered as a saint by many Orthodox, and was widely read and widely revered in many Orthodox countries, particularly Russia and Serbia, and probably others as well. And my question is, at the end, what is the Orthodox position on the issues like this?
Okay, the
Do
question.
we consider him as a saint, or in his writings as a holy, or just as a beneficial in a way that they are in one way or another inspired?
The question is, what do we do about people like Saint Isaac the Syrian, who has traditionally been considered within the Orthodox Church to be a saint, and yet he was he supposedly held doctrines which were not Orthodox. Actually, he was not the Monophysite bishop of Nineveh. He was the Nestorian bishop of Nineveh. He lived during the 7th century, and the 7th century was a time during which the Church of Persia, the church which was geographically located in modern-day Iraq and Iran, and which actually during the 7th century was spreading all the way to China. During that same period, they were in the process of accepting Nestorian doctrines. So the question is, what do we do with a person like Saint Isaac? Now, Saint Isaac, the problem is that what is called the Church of Persia at that time had not entirely separated itself from the Orthodox Church. It was a long and drawn-out process in which it is very difficult to ascertain at what particular point they cut themselves off from the Church. It appears that by the Middle Ages they had entirely separated them from the Orthodox Church, and they were considered to be so by both the Orthodox and themselves. But at that time, during the 7th century, they had accepted, there was a strong movement within their church to accept Nestorian beliefs. But there was also a very large group in the church which did not accept these beliefs, or accepted perhaps part of them, but considered themselves nevertheless to be of one faith of the churches of Rome and of Constantinople and the other Orthodox churches of the West, as they refer to them. So it's very difficult to state that at that time, at the time when Saint Isaac was a bishop of that church, that church was entirely in heresy, because at that time, for example, the patriarch I believe his name was George, and he may even have been the Catholicos, they call them, the Catholicos who ordained Saint Isaac. He wrote a synodical letter stating that we hold the same faith as the churches of Italy and Rome and Constantinople and Jerusalem. So it's very difficult to state that Saint Isaac was not actually an Orthodox saint, that he was an historian. He belonged to that church which very soon was to become an historian. But I don't think that you can state definitively that at the time that he lived, that it was clearly an historian church. This actually is related to a larger question of what is the process by which a church abandons orthodoxy and enters into heresy. And it's been actually a very divisive one amongst the old calendars. It's been stated amongst the old calendars at what point is grace lost by a church which is entering into heresy. And I think if you look historically at the development of various heresies, it's very difficult to pinpoint one particular point at which the grace goes on and off like a light switch. There comes a point at which it's clear that both sides consider the other to be an alien body, and the same problem exists, for example, with the Roman Catholic Church. The anathema, the heresy of the filioque and of the papacy existed within the Roman Catholic Church from the end of the 8th century, and it existed within the West, festering, so to speak, for several hundred years. In 1054, the churches of Rome and Constantinople excommunicated each other precisely over these doctrinal points. But intercommunion between Rome and the other Orthodox patriarchies did not stop immediately in 1054. It didn't stop. Intercommunion between Rome and Jerusalem did not cease until the First Crusade. In 1099, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem, and the next year in 1100, they replaced the Orthodox patriarch with a Latin patriarch. The Patriarchate of Alexandria appears to have remained in communion with Rome all the way up until the Fourth Lateran Council in 1214 or 15. But at the same time remaining in communion with the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the other Orthodox patriarchates. So at any time when you have a heresy which is developing within the Orthodox Church, there exists a period of time in which the ecclesial position of the body which is going into heresy is somewhat in doubt, what its ultimate status is. And sometimes you will find Orthodox followers